Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the August Local Employment Dynamics, or LED webinar. Before I introduce today's speakers, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with all supplemental materials relating to the webinar within 30 business days. We welcome your questions during the webinar. Please submit your questions using the Q&A panel, which is located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Once you've found the Q&A panel, make sure you choose All Panelists from the drop-down menu. This will ensure we see your question. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the Q&A panel, or we will share your question with the presenter to respond to during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, we ask you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We suggest keeping the chat panel open as we will provide key links and other resources throughout the webinar. Keep in mind, you won't be able to respond to the chat. That is for us to send out links and other resources related to the presentation. As you know, we are in a virtual environment and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser or consider logging out and coming back into the session. If you are having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or calling into the webinar via phone. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the Local Employment Dynamics Partnership, in collaboration with the Council for Community and Economic Research and the Labor Market Information, it is my pleasure to welcome my friends and colleagues, Heath, Hayward, and Raza as they present Extract, Analyze, Visualize Loads from the LED Extraction Tool. The LED Extraction Tool provides easy access to the raw data products produced through the LED partnership, and a recent release of the tool now includes access to the LEHD Origin Destination Employment Statistics, or LODES data product. In this presentation, the process for querying loads via the LED extraction tool will be highlighted, along with easy ways to use open source programming languages such as Python and R to access, analyze, and visualize outputs from the tool. Heath Hayward is a geographer and applications developer in the Center for Economic Studies at the U.S. Census Bureau. He has developed data tools from the LEHD program since 2006. Prior to working at the Census Bureau, Heath completed his master's degree in Geographic Information Science at the University of Denver and his bachelor's degree in economics from DePaul University in Indiana. Raza is a data scientist in the Center for Economic Studies at the Census Bureau. In his current role, he focuses on integrating data science techniques into the Census Bureau's data products and applications. Raza has a Master's of Science in Data Science from Duke University and a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Chicago. Before attending graduate school, Raza was a policy analyst for the Alzheimer's Association for 4 years, conducting statistical analysis and research to further the association legislative and regulatory agenda. With that, I hand it over to Heath.
Great. Thank you, Arlene. So good afternoon and welcome. As mentioned, my name is Heath Hayward. I'm happy to be here today with my colleague Raza. And as mentioned, we work in the LEHD program here at the Census Bureau. So we will be talking about a couple of recent releases that we're excited about. First off, the ability to query loads data via the LED extraction tool, as well as a new code samples data product that we can use to analyze and visualize loads and the post-secondary employment outcomes data products using open source tools. First, a little bit of admin. As always, the opinions and the statements in this talk are ours alone. They do not represent the views of the Census Bureau. There is also no confidential information disclosed in this particular talk. Quick note about the agenda for today. So I'll provide a bit of background about the LEHD program, about how we produce the cost-effective public use information that hopefully many of you already use, We combine federal, state, and Census Bureau data on employers and employees. I'll also give an overview of the LEHD Origin Destination Employment Statistics, or LODES, and discuss the basic functionality of the LED extraction tool and where it fits within our dissemination framework. I'll then do a live demo of how to extract LODES data from the tool. And then after that, Raza will discuss the recently released LEHD code samples. He'll walk through a few different live demos of how to use the tool, how to read in data, how to join it to other data products, and how to analyze it using R and Python. And then we expect to have plenty of time for questions at the end. So as mentioned, LEHD stands for Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics. This program has been around since early in the 2000s. The real value that we add is we're able to construct a unique employer-employee data set. Covers over 95% of jobs in the United States. We do this by connecting existing administrative records with census and survey data to produce new public use data products, as well as microdata for research. And we do this all with no new respondent burden. We gain access to the administrative records on jobs and firms through a unique and voluntary federal-state partnership. So our state partners agree to share unemployment insurance, or UI, earnings data, as well as quarterly census of employment and wages, the QCEW data. They share that with the Census Bureau. The LEHD program combines these administrative data with other data sources to create statistics on employment, on earnings, job flows, and we do this at very detailed geographies, as well as a variety of different levels of industry and demographic characteristics. Here's a quick diagram showing the LEHD data infrastructure. Here on the left side of this data cloud, we can see the firm data. So we get the firm data, which is the QCEW, from our state partners. That provides the information about the different establishments and firms within each state. We get information on firm age and firm size and other characteristics from the business register and different economic surveys. The other important input is the jobs data. So that's the UI wage records that we get from our state partners. Then we also get OPM data that helps us with get information on federal employment. And then lastly, we bring in person level data from different federal records, as well as censuses and surveys. So that can include ACS, the census numident, and decennial. So all of this comes together to form this national linked frame of jobs, and out of which we produce public use data products. Within the cloud here, we can see ongoing research happens with all of the economists within the Center of Economic Studies, as well as within the LEHD program. We have many public use data products, of which we will talk about a few of them today. We have tabulations that go all the way back to 1990 for many of them, and are as current as 2024 Q4 for the QWIs. So let's talk a little bit about LODES. This data product was developed when creating the On the Map application in the mid-2000s. Most notably, LODES provides detailed spatial patterns on where workers live and where they're employed. We can see the spread of jobs by employment census block, by residential census block, as well as the connections between the two. And these data allow us to answer interesting questions such as, where do workers employed in my city's central business district live? Or the reverse of that, where do residents that live in my city's central business district, where do they work? Additionally, jobs are tabulated by a variety of firm and worker characteristics such as age, earnings, industry, worker sex, race, ethnicity, educational attainment, as well as firm age and firm size. A few more details about LODES. Unlike some of the other data products in the LEHD program, such as QWI, where there's a variety of different measures of employment that are available, LODES provides a single tabulation. And this measure is beginning of quarter employment as of Q2 of each year. So what this means is that if you were employed at the same firm across the seam of Q1 to Q2, so May 31st to June 1st in a particular year, you're being tabulated in loads. Prior to its release in the LED extraction tool, users could only access the loads data via the on-the-map data tool or by downloading the raw data files. These data files are structured as follows. We can see residence area characteristics and worker area characteristics. So those are single-sided data sets that basically provide job counts broken down by different firm and worker characteristics for a single census block. There's also the origin and destination file type. So that is where you have both the home census block and the work census block. In order to access these different raw data files, we've developed two different paths to create queries within the LED extraction tool. There's an area characteristics path where you can select the home data or work data or both, and then a separate path where you can download the origin destination data. We can talk a little bit more about the file structure during the demo that's coming. Here we can see some information about the availability of data within loads. So as you can see, we have data going all the way back to 2002. The most current data available is 2022. We will be releasing a new year of loads data later this fall. So that will be 2023. We expect that 2023 data will include all states except Alaska and Michigan. We will be releasing a backfill of data for Mississippi. So 2019 to 2022 data for Mississippi plus the 2023 data as well. We can also see that different times that new characteristics were added into loads. So we can see that federal jobs are available as of 2010. We can see different worker demographics were added as of 2009. And we can see that firm age and size variables were added, are available in 2011 all the way up to 2022. And one more table to look into the different variable crossings available in loads. The rows here are the three different file types, and we can see the residence blocks and the work blocks are available in the OD data. We can see that labor market segments are available and characteristics are not available for the origin destination. So the distinction between characteristics and labor market segments, we can get into those details when we jump into the tool. But essentially when we provide the origin and destination, home and work, we are not able to show as much detailed demographic data. So labor market segments are not quite as detailed. As you can see, we have earnings and worker age. The industry segments are composed of groups of NAICS sectors. So what is the LED extraction tool? So this tool allows access to the raw data files produced through the LED partnership in a simple query building interface. The value of this tool sits sort of squarely in the middle between the raw data download that we have available and the data visualization tools that we have on offer. We wanted to provide that sort of in-between option where someone could come in and say, well, I'm interested in the raw data, but I don't want to download or I can't download these large complex files. So it allows access to all the measures, all of the years and quarters, and all of the geographies for the quarterly workforce indicators, the job-to-job flows, and the loads data sets. But it allows you to go through this streamlined interface where you grab only the information that you want. So you're only getting the columns that you want, only the rows that you're interested in, and it's much easier to manage once you've downloaded this smaller size file. This tool was first released back in 2013 to enable access to the quarterly workforce indicators. And we updated it in 2022 to include the job-to-job flows data, as well as adding some new features such as a shopping cart for easy management of your query parameters, as well as allowing cross-state queries for the QWIs. And then at the end of June this year, we released the loads dataset. All right, let me go ahead and jump into a live demo. So here we can see the LEHD homepage. So this is the place where you can find all of this information, data and data tools. You can see all of the data tools here on the left side of the screen, and you can see links to all of our different data products here. For example, if I click on loads data, it will jump over to the data tab and give me a variety of different links where I can click on the raw data download. So if I click on this here, I can see an FTP type place where I can download OD, RAC, and WAC, as well as some documentation and version files. I can also come and click the LED extraction tool, or I can see that the loads data set is available in the on-the-map application. Also, I'd like to emphasize the importance of the loads tech doc. A lot of really valuable information can be found here, as well as data notices. So the data notices is updated every year and includes information that's specific to the most recent release. And you'll see we just recently added some links that go to the loads code samples, which Raza will talk about shortly. But a real quick look at the loads tech doc. So this particular document is where you'll find everything that you need to see related to understanding the schema of loads. For example, if we come down and look here, we can see this is the information I just showed you about availability. And we can see a description of how the file names are parsed out in terms of, we have the state, the part, we have job type and year, and then we can see what the columns represent. And we'll take a look at this in more detail once we dive into the extraction tool. All right, so you can access the LED extraction tool via these quick links on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So here we can see links to the different data products. QWI has a single path where you would build your query. Job to job flows is down below. That required 4 different paths in order to sort of make a streamlined and easy to use interface. For loads, we decided to break it up into 2 different paths. So area characteristics is where you would find the residence and work area characteristics, and then OD obviously is where you would find that particular type of data. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to click on area characteristics. So as many of you know, loads is all about geography. And one of the real benefits of the loads dataset is the detailed geography that's available because it's tabulated at the census block level. So whenever you go into the on the map tool, the first thing you see is a map. And on the left side, you see a search where you can look for your geography. We decided to do something similar here. So the first thing that you will do is type in a geography that you're interested in. So I'm going to type in, let's type in San Mateo. And we can see all of the different matches for that particular name. So we can see there's a county, a couple different places, a workforce investment area, county subdivisions. We can see census block groups, census tracts, as well as some other geographies that don't match. So to add it to your cart, the simple thing to do is you just click checkbox and it will jump over and show up in your selection. Now, one thing that I want to be very, very clear about, because loads is tabulated at the census block level, that's what your output is going to look like coming from the LED extraction tool. We don't do any aggregations in this tool. If you're interested in getting aggregations, the value, you'll want to use the on the map application for that. So what we're doing here is we're selecting higher level geographies in order to provide the list of census blocks. And you can see that information here. If you hover over this little question mark here, you can see this information that basically geographies are added to the shopping cart that's used to determine the set of blocks returned in the query. So you can add a variety of different geography types. It doesn't really matter. In the back end, all it's doing is going to the block crosswalk that we produce and doing a join between the higher level geographies and then returning the list of blocks. It will deduplicate. So for example, if I selected California and all of the counties or some counties in California, it would deduplicate that and only show one set of counties. There is a lot of flexibility in this particular search. So for example, I can type in, for example, comma, and then a state FIPS. So that will give me a bunch of information related to the state of Mississippi. So we can see Mississippi counties are returned as well as counties that border the state of Mississippi. And you can see a variety of different geographies returned. We do show only the first 50 results. And if you want to see the data set without limits, we can just click this here and it will change this link here, the drop down to search counties only. One thing I'd like to point out as well, in the years tab here, because loads data is not available for all years of data, if I come and click on the years tab, you can see, I didn't actually select, let me go back. So if I select a Mississippi county, when I look at years, it will tell me information about whether or not workplaces are available for this selected geography. So we can see it knows that I've selected Mississippi in my shopping cart, and it'll tell me there's not any workplaces for 2019 to 2022. So I'm going to click reset here and go back and to my original plan to look at San Mateo. So let's say I work in the county development office, and I'm interested in learning more about workers that live within the Half Moon Bay County subdivision. So I'm going to select the Half Moon Bay County subdivision, and then we can move on to the second tab. So job attributes, this is where you'll find all of the detailed information about firm and worker characteristics. So the characteristics, there's, I believe, about 41 different characteristics that can be selected. We can click on these ribbons here on the left side to display them and then add them into the cart. So for example, I can click select all to say I'm interested in getting breakouts by these 3 different age categories, and you can see that it's been added into my shopping cart. We also have information on worker earnings, NAICS sectors, worker race, ethnicity, education, and worker sex. You'll notice that we do have firm age data, but that is only available for all private jobs and for 2011 and later. So it's not available for older years. So we also, in the area characteristics path, we have the ability to look at both characteristics and labor market segments. And as mentioned in this little help bubble, we really only recommend users play with the labor market segments if they want to do a characteristic crossing. So for example, if they want to look at all age groups broken down by earnings. But I'm going to go ahead and select that, and we can add that into our query. In terms of job type, this is an interesting classification within the loads data. So this is a combination both of ownership, so public jobs or private jobs, as well as job dominance. So you'll see the combination here showing all jobs or primary jobs, private jobs or private primary jobs. So as you know, many people can have more than one job. For the purposes of making workers and jobs equivalent, we often suggest that users do a select primary job. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the private primary jobs default. And here are the years that are available. I'm going to go ahead and select 5 years of data so that we get a little bit of a time series. And you can see there's no restrictions in terms of the California data for year availability. And then I can come over to the Summary and Export tab and click Submit Request. So you will notice these NA not applicable labels here. When we released the tool, we noticed there was a bug with the row estimator. So that's not currently working right now, but we hope to get a fix out for that soon. So immediately when I click Submit Request, a new panel popped up here with my results. And you can see that we can get access to area characteristics on the resident side. So workers that live in the selected county subdivision are workers that are employed within the selected county subdivision. And then we have a variety of zip files that include a combination. So let's go ahead and click on the resident area characteristic file. So I'm going to download that file. And then because I think it can be a little bit confusing to use, I'm going to go ahead and show how I would bring this into an Excel workbook, maybe even create a pivot table. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Excel here. So because the columns of the loads data are based on census blocks, there can be leading zeros, and we don't want to lose the leading zeros. So I recommend bringing it in by clicking the Data tab, and then bring in Import from Text CSV. And I'm going to click on the rack file that I just downloaded. And this is going to ask me, how do I want to load this data? And you'll see it thinks that this 15-digit code under home geocode is a number. So we want to click on transform the data to make sure that it's being imported correctly. And the first thing you're going to want to do is come in and make sure that this data type for the first column is text. So I'm going to change data type as text, replace current. And now we can see the 15-digit code for the census block now makes a lot more sense. The other thing you'll want to make sure to do is ensure that first row as headers is active as well. So I can click close and load. And now here we are looking at the residence area characteristic file for the county subdivision that I was interested in. So this is typical of a area characteristics file. We see the home geocode. 06 is the FIPS code that many of you may recognize for California. We can see as of 2018, there were 226 workers living in this particular census block. And then CA1 through CA3 are the 3 age breakdowns. So workers under the age of 29, 30 to 54 in CA02, and over the age of 55 and older here. So we can see the breakout by the different age categories for each block. If I wanted to look at this in a pivot table, I could just go click on Insert, click Pivot Table, just look at this entire range. So there's many different ways that you can play with pivot tables. One way that I think is interesting, I'm going to drag year down to be the different rows. I could drag segment down to be a filter, because remember, I chose segment as a worker earnings. And then we can add in all of the different age breakouts into the values. So now we can see the sum of these different columns. Let me come over here and make sure I'm looking at the segment, because I think it's adding all these together. So we want to look at the all segment. So for example, there's 10,672 workers that live in Half Moon County subdivision as of 2022. And then we can see the breakouts. If I wanted to look at this from the perspective of a line chart, I could just come and insert a line chart like this. Let's say I'm not interested in the total. I only want to care about the 3 different age breakouts. So now we can see changes over time for the last 5 years for young workers, more middle-aged workers, and then older workers. And then I could also decide I want to look at this from the perspective with different filters. So I can come in and say, okay, I want to only look at the low-wage, low-earning workers. So now I can filter, and I can see that there's quite a bit more volatility in workers that are earning the lower earning workers compared to the sort of middle. And then finally, I can filter by the the workers that are earning a little bit more. So that's an example of how to create the pivot table using output from the area characteristics. And real quick, before I hand it over to Raza, I want to show the origin destination path. So this one is very similar. The big difference here is that there's a little bit less detail in terms of characteristics. And you also have the option to select home and work at the same time. So I'm going to type in Chicago, and we can see that now I have the option of selecting two different checkboxes here. So if I select on the resident side, we can see over here in the shopping cart, we have a home side and a work side. So I've only selected the resident side, and we can see right now what I'm doing is saying everyone that lives in Chicago, where do they work? I have not constrained the other side. I can, if I would like, I can click on both sides, and this would be something akin to a paired area analysis on the map if I select both home and work. But you don't have to do that. And I think for most people, whenever they do an analysis with loads data, they're often interested in holding one side constrained and leaving the other open. As with the area characteristics, I can mix and match geographies. I can add a bunch. It will basically just take those geographies and combine them together into a single list of blocks. In terms of job attributes, it's similar, although now we don't have characteristics because we don't quite have that detail. As mentioned before, we can look at breakouts by industry though. So I'm going to go ahead and select industry segments. So these are groups of NAICS. We have goods producing, trade, transportation, and utilities, and all other services. One thing to notice here, I've selected work anywhere. So that's why we're seeing all of these different labels here that inform me that if I look at 2022 data, there won't be any Alaska workplaces, Mississippi workplaces, or Michigan workplaces in that data. And that's because they are not currently sending data. So I can come in and click Submit Request. Then I can click to open the CSV. And we can see something very similar to what we looked at before, where we come in and we can bring in a CSV. Make sure to transform it. So you can see here we have both a work geocode and a home geocode. So I'm going to make sure that this is text. Geocode and the work geocode. And then close and load. So while this loads, there are a couple things that we are interested in improving in this tool. We did release this before we were able to add in location-based services. So we do want to add in an update that starts a user with a geography and uses local storage to sort of remember a previously used geography just to save you a little bit of time. We also want to improve the tool, the geography search to allow for geo-IDs. So I know a lot of people are interested in searching by labels, but some people might be interested in searching for typing in an 11-digit block group code, for example, and getting a result. So here's a quick look at the data for where we have looks like I lost my column headers, but this is the work geocode and this is the home geocode. And then these are the job counts over here. So with that, I think I'm ready to send it over to Raza to talk a little bit about the code samples. Stop sharing my screen. All right, take it away, Raza.
Great. Thanks, Heath. Yeah, and hello, everyone. I am really excited to be here to talk about the back half of this presentation, talk about code samples, and do another demo. All right. Okay, so Heath alluded to them a little bit, and I'm hoping that this plays really nicely into what we just saw with the LED extraction tool. But so first, I just want to talk about, what are the code samples? So they're a new public resource that we actually just released this week. And what they are, they're little snippets of open source code languages. In this case, it's R and Python. And they are showing users essentially how you can access the data, but also do more complicated things like analysis or manipulation and visualization as well. Currently, we have code samples published for 2 of our data products, LODES, which obviously Heath was just talking a lot about, and then the PSEO data set, which is the post-secondary education outcomes. I'll talk about that a little bit. And we are hoping to publish samples for our 3 remaining major data products in the coming months. And so who are these code samples for? I think that I'm hoping there's a pretty broad audience for these. I think the people who it will be most useful to are people who have used our data or want to use our data that are have basic familiarity with either the programming language of R or Python. I don't think that's exclusively the case, because I think if you use any programming language or even Excel to access the data, there's a lot in these code samples that just talks about, there's text also that talks about the nuances of the data and different things to consider when conducting analyses or doing merges or aggregation. So I'm hopeful that they can be useful to a lot of data users. And so today, just talked about what the code samples are. I'm going to talk a little bit about the PSEO data products because we haven't heard about that today. Then I'm going to walk you through the examples of the code samples themselves, show you the web pages, and talk about how you might use them. And then we're going to do something I'm hoping is fun, which is a live demo of how, a specific problem that I'm going to propose that we can solve with LODES data and how the code samples could help us solve that problem. Okay, so first, I just want to talk about a brief aside on the PSEO data product. So again, that's post-secondary education outcomes. Excuse me, post-secondary employment outcomes. And what this is essentially is a relatively newer data product from the LED partnership that provides information on essentially employment outcomes and earnings for individuals graduating from these post-secondary institutions. So these institutions are anything from, 4-year colleges, associate's degrees, community colleges, masters, PhDs. And essentially, we partner with these institutions, usually state coalitions, for them to provide us data on individuals who are graduating from those institutions, and we can match those with the earnings data and jobs data that we have to say what those earnings are. And so just on this map, you can see the partners that we currently have and the partners we're getting, and a good idea of the coverage that we have of total graduates in each state, an estimate of that. So again, just quickly, what data do we get from PSEO? So there are 2 main types of PSEO data. The first is earnings, which is a dollar value that's inflation adjusted. It's going to provide information on earnings at the 25th, the median, the 50th, and the 75th percentile. The other one is flows, which is rather than a dollar figure, that's a number. And that is the number of graduates from a specific institution, which industry that they're working in, and which geography that they're working in, right? So that could be, you might want to know for a specific institution, what are the number of graduates who are working in state in a specific industry? The flows data would provide that for you. And we provide these information by various breakdowns, obviously by institution, also by degree level, like I was mentioning, bachelor's degrees, associate's degrees, master's degrees. And then also by graduation cohort, approximately when in time these people graduated. And then finally, field of the degree, which would be something like biology or statistics or history. And these statistics are published for 1, 5, and 10 years after graduation, right? So you could get the 50th percentile earning at those 3 different time points, for example. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and actually show you the code samples. So we'll have the link to these in the chat. But this is the web page of the code samples that we've now published. And so in the table of contents, you can see currently, as I mentioned, we have code samples available for 2 of our data products, the loads and PSEO. So I just want to talk about these a little bit in detail before going into a specific example. I'll say the appendix is a good place if you are interested in replicating these code samples yourself. The appendix has information and instructions how to create the environments that would be needed to replicate these code samples or build on them yourself in Python or R. Those instructions are written for someone who has at least minimal experience with the language, just as a caveat. Okay, so the way that we've organized the loads code samples is, I think, into these 2 sections. And you just saw, I think Heath did a really good job talking about the structure of the loads data and how to get the most out of it, how to get it out of the extraction tool. But it is still a very complex data product, right? I think it's organized logically, but it's a very large data product. There are a lot of files. And so there is just some serious complexities to using the raw data or the output from the extraction tool. And so the first section here is what I call these building blocks. And that is any individual task you might want to do with loads data, right? And so that could be as simple as reading in the data, and then it gets much more complex. So just to dive in there and give it a little bit of example. So let's talk about the simplest, or maybe not the simplest, but the first step would be loading data, right? And there are 2 ways that you could use these programmatic languages to load in the data. You could use it from the raw data files, in which in this example, I load them directly from that file structure that Heath was showing. Or you can use an output from an extraction tool query that you have downloaded. So for using the raw data files, I've provided these 2 functions and you'll see Python and R examples here. And these functions allow you to get a specific 1 file, right? And as Heath mentioned briefly, the file structure is complicated. There's some details on it here. I'll encourage you to look at that on your own. But we have these 2 functions, one for reading the loads data, which is going to be the data on the rack, the WAC, or the OD, as Heath was talking about, and then the geographic crosswalk, which doesn't actually contain any loads data, but it contains information on all the blocks in a given state, and then combined the whole United States and which geographies those blocks fall into. Right, so these functions provide you a way to use the raw data, pull in whatever you want, and then do more complicated analyses. These functions are a really good place to start because I think more than providing you access to the data, they also help you understand the structure of the loads data itself. I will say we also then provide information on how to read it from the extraction tool, which you'll see is really simple. I'm going to talk about that in my demo, so we won't need to go into that. And then you can see there are other building blocks for specific ideas. I'll encourage you to check out those yourself. I'll refer back to some of them in the demo. And then after the building blocks, I give an example of an analysis you might want to do in a full example and how we can use those building blocks to achieve that goal. And we're essentially going to do a version of that live here. We're going to see how that goes along with me. So then I think that's enough for loads. In the PSEO section, so PSEO section is organized a little bit differently. It's not quite as complicated of a data product. It's definitely smaller. So I've really organized this into these three sections. The first one of which is reading data, again, which I provide some information on how you can read data. The PSEO data has an API. You can access it through the Census API or the raw data files again, right? The loads data is not in the Census API. So those two options are shown in the reading the data files. And then I also provide some information on how to do some analyses and some visualizations of the PSEO data that are not easy to do in PSEO Explorer, which is our data tool. And the link to PSEO Explorer should be in the chat. It's a great tool. It's really cool. And I also think it's a really good way for exploring the data. But there are some things that it doesn't do fantastic. One of those things is visualizing data over time, right? So here in this code sample, we give a specific thing that someone might want to see, which is earnings at all institutions in Illinois for engineering bachelor's degrees over time, which is not a thing that you can see in the easily in the PSEO Explorer. And so you can see here that this code in Python and R will generate this nice little graph that'll show you that. And you can hopefully use this if you say, I want to create something like that myself, but for a different state or institution, you can sort of use that as a starting point. So that is code samples. And it's just an overview of the website. I encourage you to check it out on your own more later, but I do want to go back really quick to the slides. Okay, so now that we've had an intro to the code samples, I want to talk about a specific example where you could use the code samples to answer a question. And so I am a huge public transportation nerd. And so we're going to do a public transportation problem. You can see, actually, I don't know if you can see with my background, my mug has the DC Metro on it, right? So this is just part of my personality. But the question here is, I want to find areas that are in Chicago underserved by the L. So if you're not familiar with the city of Chicago or the public transportation system there, the L, sometimes spelled as you see it here with the single L, sometimes people will say EL. It's short for elevated train system. And many of the lines in Chicago are elevated above the ground. That's why it's called that. And so I want to use loads data, specifically the origin destination data that Heath was talking about, to see if we can find areas that are underserved. And so underserved has many potential definitions of transit deserts, in the public transportation and urban planning sphere, specifically here because loads deals with jobs, workplaces, residences. I'm interested in commute potential, right? And the OD data, the loads data in general, right? We don't have any way to guarantee that people with workplace and residence are actually making that journey to work, are actually commuting, but it's certainly a good proxy for who might be, right? And so here, I'm interested in census tracts that have commute potential. Right, so those I'm interested in people who have a workplace that's near the L, but they don't live near an L. So if there was, a new rapid bus or light rail or rail line, those people could then take it to work if they were journeying to work, right? And so the data we need for this is the loads origin destination. And Heath was really nice to cue me up to show that Chicago OD query, which we are going to use. We also need information on where the L stops are in Chicago, right? So we can find places that have workplaces that have that are near an L stop and residences that are not near an L stop. And then finally, we need I want this data from Tiger, which, if you're not familiar with Tiger, is they're geographic files that are published by the Census Bureau that contain geographic boundaries, essentially. So they go as large as states, as small as census blocks. But here we'll use the tracks so we can create a nice visualization. Okay, and so before sharing some code and some output, I just want to hit home exactly what we're doing one more time, right? To find areas that are underserved, right? So you imagine that we have a residence tract, a tract where people are living in the city of Chicago. How many of those people have workplaces that are near an L-stop and how many of them have workplaces that are not near an L-stop, right? And that ratio could show us places that have a high potential for transit, right? Those people, if the transit better serve them, better access them, then they might use it to get to work because their workplace is near an L-stop if they are journeying to work. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so what I'm sharing you now is a Jupyter notebook, which if you're not familiar with the Jupyter notebook, don't worry about it too much. It is essentially a way to run Python interactively. I'm gonna do this example in Python. I use both Python and R. I'm more familiar with Python. And a Jupyter notebook is just a way to have dynamic. You can have text and formatted text, and then you can have code and code output. It's almost like a live blog post with text, and that's how I'm going to use it here essentially. And so we're doing the analysis problem is the problem I just stated, right? We're looking for underserved L areas, people with high commute potential. And just to break down a couple more specific data points. So the area of interest, we're just going to do census tracts within the city of Chicago, and specifically places where people live, the residences that are currently not near a L-stop. And the time period, as Heath mentioned, the most recent data right now is 2022. So we'll just go ahead and grab that. And that was the year that he grabbed in his example. And then the metric of interest is that last slide that I was just showing, is that the share of people who have a workplace near an L-stop over the total number of jobs, right? Compared to the people that don't have a workplace that's not near an L-stop. And so then I go over the data sources, which we talked about. Hopefully we'll also be able to put this up with the other webinar materials so you can go through it on your own. So the first step is to get the data, right? Maybe not the most interesting step, but it is very important. And it also, again, shows some of those quirks and important features of the data. And so there are two ways, as I mentioned, to get the data. We'll start by doing it from the raw output, and we'll compare that to the extraction tool. So I talked about those functions that I wrote that I used. I wasn't lying here. I'm using these functions that I wrote. And one fact about the OD data is that the files are separated into two main types of files. And so there's something that we call the main OD file. And those are contain all information on jobs where the workplace and the residents are in the same state, right? So here I'm asking for the Illinois data for 2022. And this is going to give me the main file. But I also want people who work in as Heath was mentioning, people who live in Chicago work in other states, right? Because they might work in nearby states, Indiana or Wisconsin, or they might have workplaces in New York or California or Hawaii. So one little quirk of the data here means that if we want people who live in Chicago but work in other places, we actually need to get the auxiliary files for every state, right? So this code has to loop through every state and get those auxiliary files, and then combine that into one file that we could use for our analysis, right? So, and then another thing I do here is I use another one of my functions in the code samples from reading in data to get the crosswalk for Illinois, which is again going to be essentially a list of all the blocks in Illinois and which geographic entities they're part of, right? So that will help us aggregate up to the census tract when we do that at the end. Okay, so we can compare that to the extraction tool, right? So this is just 2 lines of code, right? It is much easier. And I just looked at this brief output of data, which will look very similar to the one that Heath was looking at, where we have the work block, the home block, the year, which we only selected 2022, and then the S000, which is total number of jobs. And because, blocks are very small, most of the rows in this will contain only one job. And that's again why we encourage aggregating above the block level, right? Is to get a more reliable statistic. But so we can see that sort of function, the structure of the data there. And to compare, I think one of the easiest ways to compare those two different methods, reading in the data, the raw data, or using the output from the extraction tool, is to look at the sizes of these. And so I've done that here. We're looking at essentially the number of rows and columns. And so from the raw data, we can see we have a little over 5 million rows. And in the extraction tool, we have much less than that. We have less than 1 million rows. And the reason that that is because the extraction tool clipped it for us, right? We have in that output only the people who live in Chicago and work anywhere, right? Whereas for the raw data, we had to get the whole state of Illinois, and then we had to go out and get all those auxiliary files, and we'd have to clip it down ourselves. So I like the extraction tool here because it's saving you that extra step, and it's also another step that you can be confident where the output is correct. And then for the crosswalk, it's actually the opposite here. So the crosswalk, the Illinois crosswalk that we read in from the file structure is 370,000 rows, which is all of the blocks in Illinois, essentially. The shape of the crosswalk from the extraction tool is actually over 8 million rows. And if you're familiar with census blocks, you may recognize that that's actually all of the census blocks, essentially, in the United States. And the reason that the extraction tool gave us this huge crosswalk is because we didn't select a work destination. We said they could work anywhere. And because they would work anywhere, they could work in any state and any block, theoretically. So it gives us that whole crosswalk. So I think that's just something to think about when you're thinking about if I'm going to use Python or R or any programming language, do I want to use an extraction tool output? Do I want to use the raw data? It really just, depends on your problem and the various advantages of those two things. Okay, so I think here we're going to use extraction tool because it's easier. So then the next step is to get the CTA stops data, right? And so I've pulled this in from the Chicago data portal, and we can see this is the geographic data. I've just plotted it for ease. If you're familiar with the Chicago transit system, you'll see these are all the stops. Off to the right here is Lake Michigan. Out here is O'Hare. And so we can use this. This seems good enough for us to use to get those distances. And so the next step will be, and this is where I think a code sample would come in handy, would be to do spatial merges, spatial conversions of the loads data, and then also merges with external spatial data. And both of those are code samples on the website. So when I was writing this, I went to those and I said, let me steal that and just adjust it for my purposes, right? And that's the kind of thing that we're hoping that you would do. And I'm going to go a little quicker because I think we're running short on time. But essentially, we're able to take the blocks from the crosswalk and use the internal points that are part of the crosswalk to create geographic format where now we have a point for each block. And then we can get the distance, and you'll see here in this little preview, this is the distance for each block in Chicago to its L stop in meters, right? And so, these are blocks that all happen to be near each other. They're all closest to the Hayward L stop. And the furthest one is about 650 meters, still about less than half a mile, right? And so now we need to join those distances to our OD data, right? And so again, we'll share this. You can look at the code, explore it on your own. But essentially what we're doing here is we're getting all that information we need at the block level and merging it in. Again, there is a code sample for doing that. And what we get here is essentially looks very similar to the output, but now we have additional information. And we have that tracked information that we've joined from the crosswalk. We have the distance of the home block to its nearest L stop, and whether or not the work block is close to an L station, right? And so then we can aggregate all of that to the tract level, right? And so in aggregating that to the tract level, then we can have for each census tract, we've now aggregated above the block level. So these are the residence census tracts. The number of people who live in that tract who work not close, farther from an L and close to an L, and the percentage, the ratio of that, which was, or not ratio, share of that, which is what we wanted. And then the distance of that home tracked to an L. Stop, right? So then now I want to visualize this, right? I have the data I wanted, I have the share I wanted, but where are those people? So we can use those Tiger files I talked about to visualize the tracks. And I'm also pulling in the L lines themselves, geographic data on the lines, so we can plot those and look at it. So then it's just a matter of plotting all that data on a graph. I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see this. So this is my final product, right? And this, of course, is a somewhat naive analysis, but for the purposes of this, I think it's really cool, right? We can see those red lines are the L lines, and we can see we've excluded the residential census tracts that are close to the L. Those don't appear because we're not interested in them because they have good service already. And so the warmer you are on this color scale, the higher share of people that have workplaces near the L. And so this makes sense, right? The sanity check on this looks right because those census tracts that are still relatively close to the L have a higher proportion of people with workplaces at the L. And that's probably because they're, walking a little farther to the train, or they're taking a bus or a scooter, or they're biking. But we do see some insights here that could help, transit planners make decisions about where to prioritize next services, right? And so I think this is just a really cool idea, hopefully, of how useful loads data is, especially the OD data, and also how the code samples can help you get started in sort of tackling more challenging problems that you want to analyze with our data. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing. That's the last bit. And I'll turn it back over to Heath just for a couple slides.
Great, thanks, Raza. Really quickly, I think just one big slide. I just want to mention that we have a lot of other data dissemination and analysis tools that are available. Information on job-to-job flows. So when someone changes jobs, gets hired from a period of non-employment, or separates from into a period of non-employment, J2J Explorer is really interesting. We have information on not only PSEO Explorer, as mentioned by Raza, in terms of post-secondary outcomes. We also have outcomes on veteran employment outcomes from 5 branches of the U.S. military. So a lot of really interesting stuff here. Make sure you take a look. And please reach out with any questions that you have. Here's my contact information and Raza's email address as well. Here's a link to the LED extraction tool and the LEHD code samples. We did put some links in the chat to different bits of the LEHD code samples. But at this point, I think we have some time for questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Heath and Raza. And before we get to the questions, as a reminder, the presentation will be accessible on the Census Academy website at census.gov/academy under the webinar tab within 30 days. The link has been added to the chat. Again, please type all your questions in the Q&A and keep your questions pertaining to the presentation. The chat has been disabled to our attendees. And then some of the questions were already answered by Heath, so I'm just going to go through a few of them that we did not get to. So one of the questions, do Alaska, Michigan, and is it Mississippi, have unique state conditions that inhibit inclusion?
So each state is different. Some have different legislation on how that governs how they share data with the federal government. I know that Mississippi is coming back. I know that Michigan wants to be a part of the partnership, and I think they're working through it right now. So I think we are hopeful that we will have a full set of states soon.
Is there a list of types of jobs that are not included in the loads data?
So I think that question is referring to the different columns in the loads data. So the C in front of different columns is a characteristic. The S refers to segment. If you have questions about the structure, I recommend looking at the Loads Tech Doc. That provides information about those different columns. But if something is not clear, definitely reach out and let us know.
Earlier, the technical documentation for loads was mentioned. The CES-WP-14-38 mentions the source data for loads are reweighted to state totals released by the BLS as the QCEW. Is this reweighting process described in further detail in the available documentation? Specifically, I am interested in the reweighting is done within any of the available categories: job types, NAICS, industry, sectors, etc.
We would like to. I think that there are some challenges with doing origin destination data sets in the API right now. So that's something that we're working towards here at Census. But at this point, right now, the QWI data and the PSEO data are available in the Census API, and we're working on all the others.
Is it FY or calendar?
I wonder, that question might have to do with the Q2, the timing of the beginning of quarter employment. I'm not sure. But in terms of the loads data year, it is a calendar year. Here's one for, are there considerations I should take when looking at smaller rural areas? I think that's a really good question because that gets at one of the challenges that we have with releasing loads data at such a fine geographic level. While we do release the data at a census block level, as Raza alluded to, we don't encourage users to take those block counts as they are. We would, it's much better to aggregate those up at least to a set of blocks that would comprise about the size of a block group. And that has to do with geocoding challenges, with getting data at that fine detailed level. So, and I think that probably is even larger when looking at a rural area as opposed to an urban area. So I think, grab larger groups of blocks, I think would be what I would recommend in that case.
Okay, and will we need an API key? Are the locations features based on WGS84 coordinate system, i.e. projected?
So the data is based on, so the loads data is just simply based on jobs inside the census blocks. The on the map data tool is based on I believe it's North American, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly the projection, but that does come into play a little bit with on the map. We do have a distance and direction analysis, so we do a sort of distance between different census blocks for home and work. But if you go to the On the Map help page, there's some information about the specific geographic systems that are in place.
All right, I don't see any more questions.
I see just a follow-up on Mark about the Jupyter Notebook. So Mark, when we release information about the webinar materials, so there's going to be the video recording of this webinar plus transcript and a PDF of the PowerPoint slides. We also are hoping to release the Jupyter Notebook that Raza was working off of.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to Heath and Raza for their informative presentation. Heath and Raza, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Yeah, I'll just say that we're always looking for feedback on the things that we publish, especially the tools and the code samples, especially because the code samples are new. So you have our emails here, and we have other contact emails on the website. And we'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts, comments, or suggestions.
Well said. Thanks all.
Right, well, this concludes the August LED webinar. Join us next month on September 17th when Adam Grundy presents Made in America, a data-driven look at U.S. manufacturing using census data. I also want to invite you to our 2025 Local Employment Dynamics Partnership Hybrid Workshop next week on September 3rd through the 4th from noon to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Our keynote speaker will be Sarah Bona, who will speak on labor market effects of generative AI evidence from software developers. Upon exiting this webinar, you will receive a pop-up to an evaluation. We would appreciate that you take the time to answer the questions so we may better serve you with future webinars. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the LED Partnership, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.